Okay, welcome back to Scope Management. This time we're talking about the process Define Scope. Define Scope is critical to project success. An unclear definition of a scope is the biggest reason for project failure. So defining the scope is very, very important. Okay, so after we've collected requirements, now we want to take on this very important step, which is going to provide us a detailed description of the project and the product and defining the boundaries and acceptance criteria clearly amongst them. So you see my inputs are the project charter. That makes sense because project success was described there at a high level. The project plan is also included, including, think about it, what knowledge group am I in? I'm in scope management. So it makes sense that I would particularly want to look at the subsidiary plan called the scope management plan. As you recall, all management plans are subsidiary plans. They are also constraints on the project, and they're also management plans, amongst other things. Okay? Project documents we've talked about many times. I'm always considering the assumptions log, which is also has constraints. Assumptions log has assumptions and constraints. The requirements documentation and the risk register, amongst other things. All listed on page 152 of the PMBOK guide and discussed in Rita's book thoroughly. Moving on to tools, right? Expert judgment. Again, it's individual groups with specialized knowledge or experience. Data analysis we've talked about a bit. Those include alternatives analysis. I've said before, those are like courses of action, or COAs as they're sometimes referred. Those are alternatives analysis. What are the various ways we can use to meet the requirements and objectives in the charter? So we'll want to evaluate various options and throw them out. We say when we do COAs, courses of action, or alternative analysis, there's usually one throwaway, but it shows that we're covering the full spectrum of options. So there's a throwaway, there's several likely, and we have the data to support them. Notice again, interpersonal and team skills are included. So with these interpersonal team skills, we're doing these all the time in the project, okay? And an example of this might be facilitation techniques. It might be workshops or working sessions with key stakeholders. But frankly, we're doing this all the time, interpersonal and team skills, because we are always dealing with stakeholders, whether they're above us in the hierarchy, below us in the hierarchy, on our team, or peer project managers, etc. And the goal then with this interpersonal skills and team skills is to reach a cross-functional and common understanding. So every time you do something, a lot of times I want to react to somebody's bad attitude or negative statements, and I try not to, because I say to myself, what am I going to win? Because it's just about my own personal pride at the moment. Sure, I can win the argument, but lose the war. So I'm cautious not to respond to people quickly or in an aggressive way or with a sharp retort. I consider that I am going to need their expertise, input, and guidance later. Let people have a bad day. Let them be themselves. They'll generally reflect and come back to you. But being cross doesn't have to. What's that? You collect more bees with honey, or flies, or something like that. You know what I mean. Okay, and then we have product analysis. This I'm going to do for projects with a product as a deliverable, and I'm going to ask questions and form answers in the process. I'm going to break down the product, maybe a PBS, product breakdown structure. Like all breakdown structures, like the work breakdown structure, or a resource breakdown structure, or a risk breakdown structure, it's hierarchical in nature. I'm going to do requirements analysis. I might do systems or engineering analysis, And value analysis or value engineering. Value analysis is, how can I, without changing the scope, add value to my project, reduce cost or shorten time, that sort of thing. Okay? Then I have my outputs. When I define the scope, think of the process. I'm in defined scope. What do I want my output to be? My scope. It's that easy. So it makes sense that the output is the scope statement. That's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to define the scope. I get the scope statement. So my project scope statement is my big output. It will list the project scope, the major deliverables, my assumptions, constraints. The entire scope is listed, including the project and product scope. It will even contain explicit scope exclusions. What's not in my project? When I was on Scott Air Force Base as a contractor doing a project in electronic flight bags, and everybody wanted in electronic flight bags. So now I'm using tablets for the aircrew to use the approach plates instead of paper copies. Before, we would fly around the world with paper approach plates and departure plates as we take off and land at various airports. Well, now they're electronic on a tablet, but those, through hackers, through malicious intent, can be modified, and the impact would be disastrous. So until we could clearly control the IT security portion of the tablet, we did not allow, we said it's not part of the project to allow people to use the tablets to do email, because email, through various capacities, can invite malicious attack. And so we excluded that from the project because we knew people would ask, hey, I've got a tablet, why can't I do email on it too, or Google searches? Because that invites, without the right protections, and at that part of the project, we weren't ready for it. Okay? So, and this is going to be the first part, this scope statement. It's the first of 3 parts that will define my scope baseline, what I'm shooting for, what is success, what I'm going to measure against. Remember, I have 3 baselines: scope baseline, schedule baseline, and budget or cost baseline. This is the first part of my first baseline that I'm going to go after. I want detailed scope description. I can progressively elaborate them, and my deliverables should be unique and verifiable. My acceptance criteria should be something that people agree to, and again, listing project exclusions. The elements of on page 155 of the PMBOK guide, it shows you the elements of a project charter and project scope statement and the various differences between the two. Okay, there we go. Now, in defined scope, I mentioned product analysis. For the exam, not for my quiz, but for the exam, if you take the PMP exam, realize the team will need to determine and define the deliverables as part of the project. The customer doesn't just give you the deliverables you want. Steve Jobs once said, the customer doesn't know what they want. So they can ask for something in a statement of work, but it is up to you to apply the technical and value stream solution that they then agree to. I also list on this slide the project scope statement, which is the output of defined scope, and everything that's in it. So remember, I said the project justification, product scope, project scope, what are the boundaries of my scope, detailed description, and acceptance criteria. That sort of thing. Okay. Here is an example of, on a web filtering project I did, what was in scope. Notice I list out of scope or not part of the project. The words don't really matter. You don't have to understand them. And then notes related to that. Just another way, a practical way of applying what the scope statement might look like. Okay? So scope planning is then going to lead us next to the work breakdown structure. So after completing the scope statement, now I'm going to further define the work by building a hierarchy and breaking it down into a work breakdown structure. And this becomes a foundational piece. This scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the dictionary that's going to go with it in the next lesson. Okay, thank you very much.